name is Vince Beresford, and I am the Executive Director for the With Hope Foundation. Hello.
Hello.
And I just wanted to take the time to have a conversation with you guys today about a topic, honestly, that's a tough one, but it's important. And it's one that, quite honestly, most schools are not even wanting to deal with. We get one of the probably most dangerous epidemics in our country right now, and that's talking about suicide and depression. The With Hope Foundation started in May of 2005 when this young lady, Amber, went into her bedroom on a morning before school and took her own life. And it was really after that, in the aftermath, when her parents felt like there was nothing they could see, nothing they could do to see this coming. And then once they learned this information that we're about to share with you, they realized that there were signs around them that they could have seen had they known what to look for. And this only made things more difficult when Amber's friends came alongside of her, and came into the house afterwards. And imagine, to their surprise, when they found out that a number of her friends were told that she was going to do this. And so now her friends are walking around with the secret for the rest of their life. I want to start off by showing you a video. This video is of Annette Craig. Annette is Amber's mom. And Annette is the one who started this foundation. And it was started because after she experienced what she experienced, she wants to have a conversation. But now, the conversation she wishes she had with Amber is now the one I get to have with you. But I want to introduce you so you'll know a little bit more about the program and a little bit more about the foundation. So take a look.
Well, 6.5 years ago, on May 26, 2005, on a late start Wednesday morning, after having breakfast with her dad and screwing around in the morning with her brothers, I had left for work early, and my husband left to drive carpool for our youngest son. And within a matter of 5 minutes of him leaving our home, our 14.5-year-old daughter Amber walked into her room and shot and killed herself. That was how suicide entered our world. Prior to that, it wasn't even a blip on our radar screen.
What would you say to kids who are in Amber's situation and contemplating suicide?
What I would tell kids who are thinking about suicide as an option is, first of all, don't do it. You have so much to live for. There's hope. There's help available. You're not alone. And that there is a better way to live. There are other options, and that we can help you find what those options are and achieve your full potential.
What about the families who are grieving the loss of a loved one? Do you have any advice that you would pass along to them?
If you're grieving the loss of a loved one who's taken their life, hang in there, hang on. It is heartbreaking, it is devastating. It's the worst thing that can happen to a family. But there is hope, and there is help, and you can piece back the nightmare of your life, and you can honor the memory of your loved one, and you can learn from them, and you can help others.
If there was one thing that you could say to Amber that you didn't have the chance to say, what would it be?
Gosh, if there was just one thing I could say to her, we miss her. We wish we would have known. We wish that we knew then what we know now.
That's really out of that information. That's what we're going to be sharing with you today. My name is Vince, as I mentioned before, and I've been a pastor for 25 years. One of the things that you do as a pastor is obviously funerals. And my motive is pretty clear. I want to do everything I can do in the next few minutes to help those of you who ever feel like they might be heading down that path where you felt like suicide might be a solution. To help you understand how many incredible, the amount of resources and hope and that help is available. Also, for those of you, I want to do the best that I can so you don't end up like so many teens that I know, where we're at a funeral and we're standing on the graveside and you look me in the eyes like so many teens have done over the years and said, but I didn't think they'd really do it. I didn't think he'd really go through with it. And it was really out of that that the foundation was born, and to do everything we can do so you guys don't have to go through and experience what their family. Now this family of 5 is spending the rest of their lives trying to adjust to become a family of 4. Inside your handouts, you got a few different things. One of them is your the outline that you have. It's got your name up at the top, or a place for your name up at the top. Also inside there, you've got a threefold pamphlet, a brochure. And on that pamphlet, you've got a couple of different pictures here. One, you've got this picture of Amber that was taken 3 weeks before she killed herself. And here she is. She was the starting goalie for her varsity team her freshman year. She was a straight A student. She was a good-looking young lady and was popular. And yet Amber had a secret that she felt like no one would understand. She had a problem that she felt like that was unsolvable. And she bought into that lie. And she told her friends. Her friends didn't know what to do. And with that lie, it ended in tragedy. And I want to do everything I can do in the next few minutes to help you understand, because this picture here, this was taken 3 days before she killed herself. So the question I have for you, does this look like a young lady who is right on the doorstep of suicide? What do you think?
She looks old.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
How old is she?
Neither did her mom, 14 and a half.
She's not.
And so really what we're doing, I want to give you the information, but what the biggest thing I hope that you hear, if you don't hear anything else, you hear these two things. One is, I've already mentioned, I want to make sure that most of you understand without a doubt, or all of you I should say, that this isn't a secret you want to keep. I mean, I could literally fill this room up with different teenagers who would want to grab you by the shoulders with tears streaming down their face and say, you don't want to walk around with what I walk around with for the rest of my life. And so this isn't a promise you want to keep. And also, secondly, I want to make sure that you understand, even going into this, my goal for you isn't for you to become the counselor, become somebody that has to fix everybody, where you feel the burden or the weight to save somebody else's life. That's not on you either. And so your main goal is to, one, not keep the secret, but also, two, get them to treatment. Get them to a trusted adult. Get them to a trusted somebody so that they can get help. And so you don't feel the weight of responsibility in order to fix this problem either. Inside that threefold brochure, you've got a wallet card. And inside that wallet card is just some signs you can. I want to encourage you to put this in your wallet. And on the inside are signs of depression, and on the rear is signs of suicide. And you're probably not going to remember all the details of everything that we're talking about, but if you get to a time in your life, or maybe for yourself or for a friend, you'll be able to look at some of these and realize and kind of have reminders of what things you need to be aware of, what things we want to make sure we want to be concerned with. And this is just a great tool. I literally know dozens and dozens of high school counselors who tell us year after year we have students come in with this card in their hand saying they have concerns either for themselves or their friends. And so we know that these things work as well as just kind of a reminder as a tool. On the top of your handout of the outline, you'll notice a bunch of different statistics that we're going to go through. But before we jump into that, I want to be able to do something here that I don't get to do often. And I want to talk about the element of what our relationship with Christ and how that plays a difference. Because I'm going to suggest that one of the greatest tensions that we deal with is being a Christian, being a Christ follower, and trying to struggle with some kind of mental health thing. And how those things go hand in hand, because the tendency is to over-spiritualize everything and make everything that if you pray more, or if you read your Bible more, if you did all the stuff, that it will make everything go away. And sometimes God does do miracles, and sometimes God does still heal people. I do believe that. Sometimes God directs people to people that can help them, because we're supposed to live life in community. And lots of times we mix those two things, and sometimes it doesn't end up very well. Charles Spurgeon is one of the kind of patriarchs of the church. And so this guy in the beginning of time, this guy who has done so much, written so much, has talked openly about his depression and his challenges. You've got Rick Warren, who wrote the most, the pastor of one of the largest churches in the world, and wrote the best-selling all-time book, second only to the Bible, 350 million copies sold, of a book called Purpose-Driven Life. And a pastor right here in California, but also been really honest about his battles and his challenges that's kind of come with the season of life. He did the presidential inauguration prayer, and he's done some incredible things as well. And you think about the book of Job, and here's Job that talks about things that echo of depression, things like, I can't eat for sighing, I hate my life, day after hopeless day, my heart is broken, my groans pour out like water, depression haunts counts my days, my weary nights are filled with pain. I mean, all of those things are screaming of this idea of depression. And I want to talk about this idea because I think the more that we understand the depression piece, the more we'll understand how these things go hand in hand. So, first one there on the very top of your page, simply says this: depression right now is the leading cause of disability in the world. It's the leading disability in the world. More people struggle from depression in the United States as well as the globe than any other time in history. Okay? Second one out of 3 teenagers suffering from depression in the U.S. will seek help in the United States. 1 out of 3. That means 66% of teenagers who are struggling with depression won't seek help. Now, one of the first questions you're going to ask, well, why would somebody not seek help? And I'm going to suggest that maybe for many people, it's because they don't identify what they're feeling or struggling with as depression. And we're going to talk more about the details of that. But please understand, of the students that have it, only about 1 out of 3, 1/3, will seek help. And here's why that's a big deal. And this is your first fill in the blank. Because untreated depression is the #1 cause for suicide in the U.S. Untreated depression is the #1 cause for suicide in the U.S. So understand this. So the rate of depression, there are more people struggling from depression in the United States than any other time. Therefore, there's more people struggling with depression that are going left untreated than any other time in history. And so therefore, when understanding that the #1 cause for suicide is untreated depression, it doesn't take a lot of forethought to see why the suicide rate is increasing at an alarming rate. Researchers estimate that 1,000 teenagers in the U.S. will attempt suicide every day. Every day, 1,000 teenagers in the United States will commit suicide or attempt suicide. Now, you start doing the math. You start putting 1,000 a day by a month. That's 30,000. 30,000 teenagers every month will attempt suicide. And then you start doing that by the year, and all of a sudden you realize we've got some pretty drastic numbers. Over 36,000 people in the U.S. kill themselves every year. That's like filling up like the Honda Center or the Staples Center like twice a year. With that many thousands of people in the United States. And the question that I hope you guys are asking is, what is going on in our country? What is going on in our world? What is changing in our world that there are more people that hopeless and are increasing in depression and suicide every year? And hopefully, as a Christian school and as a Christ follower, we kind of step back and answer that question and realize that God has designed us to be in a relationship with Him. And when we lack that relationship with Him, it's a pretty hopeless place to be. And also, if we don't have the education of understanding how our bodies work, sometimes we can over-spiritualize things and blame things on God or whomever when it really isn't a spiritual issue at all. Sometimes it's just a health issue. And God is encouraging us to get the help and the hope and that He desires for us to have. Nearly 1 million people worldwide commit suicide every year. 1 million people a year on our planet commit suicide. 3 to 5% of teens in the U.S. experience clinical depression every year. So 1 out of 25 teens could be clinically depressed. And for every completed suicide, there's 100 to 200 attempts made, which ends up being about 3.6 to 7 million suicide attempts every year. Keep in mind, there's only 350 million people in the United States. Obviously, there's people who are, single people who have multiple attempts, and that's where most of the numbers come from. But you got to understand, so when a suicide hits a community, it devastates. I mean, when it hits a high school, it devastates the high school. Oftentimes, we're brought in after a tragedy to talk to teachers, to talk with students, to talk with parents, and it's horrifying. It's amazing how much damage one suicide does to a community, and it obliterates a family. But for every suicide you and I know about, completed suicide, there's 100 to 200 attempts made that no one will ever hear about. Statistically speaking, there will probably be a number of suicide attempts at this school this year that no one will ever know about. They'll come back and say, well, I was sick for a couple of days, or I had some procedures done, or I was dehydrated, or whatever the case may be. And they'll come back in because we don't hear about those. We usually only hear about the completed ones. And so I think it's important for us to understand that as well, because usually the completed ones are the only ones that get really our attention. So, Right now, suicide is the third leading cause of death for ages 15 to 24. That jumps up to second leading cause of death for college-age students. The fastest growing age group for suicide is 10 to 13, it's junior hires. Although there is a older senior citizen group, age group, which is growing as well. A person dies from suicide every 14.2 minutes in the United States. A few years ago, we've been using a video, and at the beginning of this video, it states that a person dies from suicide every 18 minutes in the United States. Because when that video was made a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, that was true then. In some of the literature that you have in front of you, when we printed that about 11, 12 months ago, the statistic was every 16 minutes in the United States. That's what you have written down in some of your stuff. But even since then, as the rate of suicide continues to increase, and the numbers increase, the time in between the suicides decreases, and we're now down to every 14.2. 1 out of 5 high school students will think about suicide. 20% of college students, or high school students, at some point will think about suicide. Now, I shared with you a little bit more about my motive for doing this. But one of my main motives for doing this is because when I was in high school, I was one of the 5. I was the 1 out of 5. I had come from a kind of a tough home life. A lot of drugs and alcohol problems. My father was killed in prison when I was growing up. My grandfather died of cirrhosis of the liver. My mom is a drug addict and an alcoholic, has been my whole life. And so I buried myself into athletics and really wanted to use athletics as the way for me to get out of there and kind of get into a college and kind of control my own destiny. Well, when I failed government my senior year, my first semester, I realized, everybody pulled their scholarships away. I mean, I lost everything. And I remember walking around my senior year, first semester, just thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. I mean, I really just felt like I didn't have the strength to continue fighting the fight that I had been doing for my whole life. Because I felt like I was getting to the end, and I realized I just had one more huge roadblock thrown in front of me. And when I got, I felt like I was already at the edge, and then that thing just pushed me over the edge. And now, I didn't attempt suicide, but what I did, I definitely was one of the person that was walking around with that thought of, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. And the reason I tell you that is twofold. One is I want you to understand that if you ever get to that point, you probably already bumped into a number of other students on this campus that feel the same way. And maybe they're just trying to hide it and fake it too. 2, if you're the 1 out of 5, it's a pretty lonely place to be. I mean, you're pretty much convinced you're the only one who feels like this or thinks like this, and that your problem, your situation is different than everyone else's. And the thing that I hope that you get even by the statistics is helping you realize that there are so many other people who are sadly going through the same thing that you're going through. And so therefore there's so much more help and hope available than there ever has been. But understanding that you're not weird, you're not psycho, you're not crazy, if and when you get to that place. And just understanding that's there. Because what happens in the next phase is we move to 1 out of 12 college students has a suicide plan. Now, let's do this. Let's say this is the road towards suicide, like that wall is, someone who commits suicide, this is the beginning of the road, and so if someone says, I'm thinking about it, they're kind of stepping onto the road. They're beginning down the path when you begin to think about it. That's kind of how that path starts, right? And if somebody starts thinking about it, that's enough reason to get somebody help. That's enough reason to get them connected with somebody, by itself. But if you ever talk to somebody and they say, I'm thinking about suicide, so first question you want to ask them is this. Do you have a plan? If you find out somebody's suicidal, first question you want to ask them is, do you have a plan? And if they say, well, no, whatever, you still obviously want to get them help, but if they tell you, if I commit suicide or when I commit suicide, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and they give you a detailed plan, just understand that they're way farther down the road towards that suicide piece, and that hopefully the alarms are going off in your head at that point, and that you're just understanding you're not at a place with them where you want to see what happens or hope for the best. That you immediately want to go and get them help, you get them connected, you want to get somebody their name or something that's going on, because if they have a plan, just understand that the danger factor has increased significantly. More teenagers and young adults die from suicide than from cancer, heart disease, AIDS, birth defects, stroke, pneumonia, influenza, and chronic lung disease combined. And there's a lot of promotion right now, Bart, about cancer and fighting cancer and all those things, and I think those are great things to fight. But we're talking about something that there's not a lot of ribbons for You know, it's not a lot. It's not a fun thing to talk about and to want to try to support suicide prevention, because it's just one of those things that yeah. But it's something that I think we've got to. I mean, if we really want to make a difference. And the thing is, why I love talking to you guys, because here's the deal. You guys know more about what's going on with each other than anybody else. You guys know more than parents. You guys know more than teachers. You guys, and chances are, statistically, if something happens, they're going to tell somebody. They're going to tell you. And so, who better should I be talking with than trying to equip you guys of knowing? Because the reality is, about 25% of a freshman class will know someone who's either attempted or committed suicide. By the time you're a senior, that jumps up to almost 90%. So the probability of you dealing with it in high school is from 25% to 90% in your 4 years here. Now, just by a quick raise of hands, how many people here know somebody who's either attempted or committed suicide? Okay? All right. So that's been about average. And so as we're beginning to look at some of this stuff, we realize how much potential, especially with this, and knowing that 90%, and this is when you're filling the blanks, 90% of young people said they would tell a friend before they committed suicide. And we know that to be the case. We know that beforehand, and obviously we know that happens afterwards as well. With all the talk about depression and everything else, the good news is it's kind of becoming more and more popular to talk about it. And so these are all celebrities, and probably faces that you would probably recognize, who have been honest and open about their bouts with depression. And even below them, you notice some of the black and white pictures, because I want you to know that depression isn't something new that just came on the scene. It's increasing at an alarming rate. But it goes back to a time when Abraham Lincoln, Richard Nixon, Teddy Roosevelt, and Mark Twain are all people who have talked about their issues and their bouts with depression. And so this isn't something new, but it is something that's almost epidemic and is growing in our country at an alarming rate. But these are some faces of folks who have attempted suicide and look to talk about it, and are talking about it, quite honestly. And again, we're going back to something where, we might recognize one of the celebrities today, but this goes back to even like Frank Sinatra, Nadia Comaneci, who's the Olympic gymnast, the first person who ever got perfect tens, Judy Garland, who played Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, Johnny Cash. I mean, all people who have been honest and open about their bouts with depression, as obviously with their attempts at suicide. These are all suicide folks who have died recently. And sadly, you see it across the board. But I even remember Junior Seau. Junior Seau, all-pro linebacker from the San Diego Chargers, played at USC, was an incredible athlete. And in his suicide note, he said, "Please study my brain so that nobody else has to deal with what I've dealt with." See, Junior Seau had something called post-concussion syndrome. And what happened, it messed up his body chemistry and lowered his serotonin and his norepinephrine levels so much to the degree because of the concussions that he wasn't able to make that connecting point for whatever reason, and wasn't able to get the help he needed. And that ended up where he ended up taking his own life. And sadly, that's a pretty normal thing. Other risk factors for suicide, here's another one you fill in the blanks. 80% of those who have attempted suicide will attempt it again. And we know that to be the case. And so hopefully somebody says, "Well, I did it once, but I'm not going to do it again. I'm doing good now." Man, I hope so. I hope that's the case. But you need to know as a friend that if they've attempted it before, the chances of them attempting again are probable. 80%. Physical, emotional, sexual abuse. Here's another one. Here's a tough statistic. By the time that most women reach adulthood, let's say, let's call that in the 30s, that about 1 out of 3, about 33% of women, by the time they reach 30 years old, will be sexually abused. And about 1 out of 7 guys, by the time they reach in their 30s, will be sexually abused. That is a traumatic event in somebody's life that affects us. Whether we like to or not, whether we want to admit it, whether we're faking it, whether we ever talk about it or not, it doesn't change the fact that it affects us. Now, we can also talk about emotional abuse and physical abuse and the other dynamics that come with that. But those are all pieces that are other risk factors. If you have family members who committed suicide, or you have depression in your family, it might be something genetically, want to encourage you to have that conversation with your parents, and have that mental health history question. And just talking about, has somebody ever committed suicide in their family? Is there a history of depression? It doesn't mean you're going to be depressed or you're going to commit suicide, but it's good for you to know, because if you ever do start feeling like that, again, hopefully that, those red flags will be going off. Alcohol or drug problems. This is how I think my family dealt with our depression. I think I have a history of depression in my family, and that's how we dealt with it. No one had ever, the focus is usually on the alcohol and the drugs, but we don't realize it's the depression that's leading my family, and myself to, having issues with drugs and alcohol and all the other pieces that came with that. Learning disabilities, folks with the pressure and the frustration and the shame for that oftentimes. Unplanned pregnancies. Even gifted students, we're finding out there's a higher risk of suicide in gifted students. Not just, but the people who are really smart and things really come easy to them because of the added pressure and all the other pieces that come with that. Let me talk about some of the myths about suicide and depression. So first one here, asking someone, are you thinking about suicide? Am I given the idea to do it? Here's the thing, honestly. In 25 years, I have never heard of anyone going to their friend and saying, hey man, are you thinking about committing suicide or something? Are you all right? And their friend went, suicide? Good idea. I haven't even thought about that. It's never happened as far as I know. Because here's the deal. If you've asked a friend, that kind of question, I mean, you see some things going on. Now, this would be weird. Like if you walked around chapel asking everybody, hey, what's up, suicide? I don't recommend doing that. You might get people think you're kind of weird, right? But if you ask this question to somebody you really care about, a few things happen. One, you could be the very first person that goes to your friend and tells them through asking this kind of question that you care about them. Two, you come alongside of them and saying, look, I see that you're struggling. I see that you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. And three, to say, I want to walk alongside with you. You don't have to do this alone. And to even initiate and starting this question, you're not going to push them down or give them the idea, but what you can do, you can start a life-saving conversation. And for your friend to really understand about how much and how concerned you are for them. Suicides happen without warning. We know that not to be the case, since we know that 90% of them tell somebody else before it happens. By the way, 90% of all school shootings, they told somebody else as well before it happened. FYI. People who talk about suicide probably won't do it. People have the idea of, well, if they're talking about it, then they probably really don't want to do it, otherwise they just do it. Well, what we know is, if 90% of somebody tells somebody before they do it, then we know that that's not the case. Okay? Another one, you're filling the blanks, number 4. The main goal of a suicidal person is to die. And that's not true. And stick with me, this may sound strange, but the ultimate goal of a suicidal person is not to kill themselves. The main goal of a suicidal person is to get the pain to stop. Okay? And so, here's the right. Everybody in here has dealt with pain and deals with stress. And I honestly believe that your generation, I have a daughter in high school too, your generation has more stress that's either put on you or you put on yourself than any other generation previously. I mean, you can't get straight A's anymore, and that's not good enough. You have to take all AP classes, and you can't get a 4.0, you got to get a 5.0. You can't just be in the choir, you have to sit, you have to sing the lead. You can't be in an orchestra, you have to sit first chair. You can't just get a good score on the SAT or ACT, you got to get, exceptional. I mean, all the stuff that you have to. And how you deal with that pressure and stress is a huge piece. And we all deal with it in some ways, but understand this. If for somebody who's dealing with depression, all of us have this thing. So imagine like we have like a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi, right? And that kind of represents our life. And then, when we go through life and get shaken up a little bit, we all have those things in life where we release that pressure in our life through sleep or exercise or reading or relaxing. I mean, whatever. We all have those ways, whatever that might be. But to a person struggling with depression, imagine not having the ability to release that pressure anymore. And that pressure is just constantly building, and it's building, and it's building, and it's building. And you see other people releasing and coming back, and this person doesn't have that. And it's just this constant. And it's really out of that you hear things like, man, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I don't know if I have the strength for this to fight anymore. Or man, sometimes I feel like it would just be so much easier if I wasn't here. Or I feel like I'm just going to give up pretty soon. I mean, those are the types of things, but those are all conversations where they're really kind of running out of options. Their coping mechanisms have stopped working, and they're really wanting, trying to find some other way to release that pressure. Last one down here, number 5, most teen suicides occur at night. That's not true. Most teen suicides occur between the hours of 2 and 6 p.m. Okay, 2 and 6 p.m. Why do you think that is? What do you think?
At work.
Okay, people are at work.
They're home alone maybe.
Okay, you're at home. Yeah, if a student wants to be home by themselves, it's probably not going to be at night when their parents are home from work, but it's probably going to be after school gets out, before your parents get home. Okay, and then here's what I want you to know: if we know that the majority of suicides occur during the hours of 2 and 6 p.m., then can you see how for a good friend who has their eyes open and sees a friend who's really struggling, and they're walking around with the weight of the world on their shoulders, they're the ones at the end of the cliff, and they just feel like there's that one more thing, and then their boyfriend-girlfriend breaks up, they get cut from the team, they fail the test. I mean, some other big thing pushes them over the edge, and you know that they can't take much more of this. Can you see how you as a friend, knowing that the majority of suicides happen during this time, you just hanging out with somebody after school could be a life-saving thing? Of just being a friend to hang out? They're like, oh no, dude, I don't want to hang out anymore. It's like, oh yeah, you do. I don't want you. You're crazy. I don't know what you're going to do if I don't hang out with you. And just like, can I stalk you for a while then if you want to hang out? And they're like, you're weird. And yeah, I am. Because that's what great friends do when their friends are hurting and come alongside. And obviously, if you really see suicidal signs, if you see that stuff that's on the cards, then hopefully you have already made the connecting piece and already gotten connections with a teacher or counselor or pastor or somebody before you got to the place. But if you don't see that and you're just in question, hanging out with somebody because you know the majority of them happen during this time is a good piece of information to know. Okay? Myths about depression, talking about it, we know that does help. Teenagers don't really get depression because they're all moody. No, we know for a fact clinically that there's thousands upon thousands of teenagers who are clinically depressed. There's nothing anyone can do to help. This was written by someone who's struggling with depression, because that's the way it feels. It feels like depression isn't something you have, it's something you are, and so therefore it's not something you get rid of. And so, but without a doubt, there is more help and hope available than any other time in history. Be able to communicate that. Telling an adult that a friend is depressed is betraying trust. Well, no. I mean, here's the reality of that. If you have a friend who's really struggling, and maybe they're just dealing with depression, or if they are suicidal, and then you go and you tell a friend, you tell a counselor, you tell a teacher, you tell a parent, you tell whatever, and they get help, honestly, when they first find out that you told somebody, realistically, they might be mad at you. They might say mean, evil, horrible things. They may scream at you and all this other stuff. But you know what I found time and time again over the years? Is that when somebody cares enough about a friend and they get the help they need, and all of a sudden they really begin to heal from what it is they're struggling with, then all of a sudden they usually go back to that same friend and say, thank you so much for caring so much about me, and you did for me what nobody else was willing to do. And I'm so glad, and that makes you one of my best friends in the whole world. Because they were able to do the difficult task of telling somebody when they really needed it. Okay? Everyone experiences depression the same. We know that's not the case, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. So, how do you get depression? Let me boil this down for you. Depression is really this: is your brain and all of our bodies produce lots of chemicals, right? So, if you're doing something, you get an adrenaline rush. That's your adrenaline gland releasing chemical in your body makes you feel that way. Your liver produces insulin for your body, and so you have, it kind of helps normalize your sugar levels. And depression happens when your serotonin or norepinephrine levels that are produced in your brain drop, and then when you have a lower, when your chemical level here is lower, that results in depression. I mean, it's pretty simple actually. But I want you to think about this. So if you went and you saw, what's your name? McKenna, and you saw McKenna and she was diabetic, right? Because her insulin wasn't producing right, and she was taking insulin. Would you look down on her and go, you're not even a real Christian. You didn't even pray enough. Why don't you just be tougher and deal with it? Can you imagine anybody doing that to her because she has diabetes? No, you'd be like, good for her that she's taking care of herself so she can live a healthy life and she can take care of her body so she can enjoy her life and have fun. But so for so many people that struggle with depression, they're like, they feel this, if I was stronger, if I was a better Christian, I wouldn't feel this way. Or if I read my Bible more, or if I prayed more, or I deserve this because I've done bad things in my life and now God is punishing me and I just have to deal with it. I mean, all that stuff is lots of times just a bunch of baloney. And really all that's happening is their serotonin levels, for whatever reason, has dropped, and it's not even a spiritual issue. It's just a chemical thing. Just, and just as you wouldn't associate taking insulin as a spiritual issue for someone who has diabetes, lots of time for someone who's depressed, helping to raise your serotonin or norepinephrine levels is not a spiritual issue either, right? But here's the problem. Only 4% of the people who have diabetes does it go left untreated. And yet about 66% of people who struggle with depression, it goes left untreated. And I'm going to tell you more about that in a second. But take a look at these brains. This is what a normal kind of chemical producing brain looks like. And then this is one of a person who's depressed, is not producing, their brain's not working correctly, for whatever reason. So there's a mental health, brain health kind of type of thing. Now, here's the thing. You could listen to happy music, and you could read a lot of Bible stuff, and you could go to more chapels and everything else. It doesn't change the fact that your chemistry in your brain is tweaked. And it may or may not be a spiritual issue. Now here's the thing. Does God come in sometimes and heal people of chemical things? And make this brain look like this brain without help from... Yeah, I think God does do that. I think God does heal people. I really believe that. But you know what I found out lots of times? God tells this person, go get some help because I designed you to live life in community and I designed you to need other people. So I want you to go to those other people, humble yourself, and get some of the help you need because I want you firing all cylinders and looking like this. And it doesn't mean you're not a good Christian. It doesn't mean you're crazy and all the other pieces. It just means your chemical levels are lower and I want to help you so you're healthy. And that could be as simple as it can be, really. So, what causes a person's levels to drop? Let me hit a couple of these. You have a traumatic event, something, I want you to think about this. So trauma is, you see an event where it's hard for your brain to even get its head wrapped around, right? It's so, awe-inspiring. So after a traumatic event, it creates a stress, heavy-duty stress. That stress is a chemical thing. Again, everything's a chemical. And then what that stress causes disorder, right, in your brain, and all of a sudden your brain doesn't do the things that it normally does. And so you have this post-traumatic stress disorder. Your brain is, not doing what it should be doing. Okay? And so that can happen for a variety of things. But trauma can cause that. Head injury. So we talk about post-concussion syndrome. That's another huge one. The weather. I lived in Michigan for 5 years. I'm born and raised in Southern California. After a couple years, you look at that depression card, thing on your wallet card, that was me. And it was because the sun disappeared, like forever it felt like when I was in Michigan. And weather affected the chemistry in my body. Okay? Childbirth. I don't know if you know the name Gwyneth Paltrow. She's a model and a actress and everything. Her postpartum depression after she had a child was so bad, she got to the point of feeling suicidal. And she was like, I just had a kid. Why am I feeling like this? It was because this was one of the things that dropped her serotonin levels because her body was turned around. Other hormonal changes, all those pieces, all that stuff comes into play, right? You realize after there's more soldiers who have died from suicide than every soldier who died in the war in Afghanistan? And where they've come back because of after some of the trauma that they've seen, and their serotonin levels and all dropped in their head, and they're not getting the help they need, and not being able to identify that. And so, it's just horrible things that we see that are happening over and over again. The concussion piece, now that's not just from athletics. It could come from athletics, it can come from a car crash, anything that you would get a concussion on. But take a look at this. These are all professional athletes who committed suicide and died, right? So, we talked about Junior Seau, Dave Duerson, both of these guys wrote in their suicide letter, please study my brain. And what we found out is we know for a fact those two guys have and died of the post-concussion syndrome because after so many concussions, it tweaked their brain, their chemistry level threw off, they never got help they needed, never able to identify it, and it led them all the way down that path. Now, we don't know if all of these folks have post-concussion syndrome, but what we do know is all of these athletes work day in and day out in an environment where concussions were normally part of the game, right? So that was placed there. Phoebe Prince, all this stuff, to be fair, what was done to her was horrible, and the bullying piece has been horrible. One of the things that I think is good is they're actually pressing charges. Some students are getting charges pressed against them for bullying, so people can't just say whatever they want to. I mean, people are getting tracked down on their Facebook page and their Tumblr and their ForumSpring accounts and all that kind of stuff. And they're actually being, you know, they're being charged and booked by the police. But one thing, bullying isn't what killed Phoebe Prince. I mean, Phoebe had a history of depression. She had a previous suicide attempt. She struggled with substance abuse. And so really what happened, I think a good picture is understanding that Phoebe was probably already standing on the edge of the cliff. And the bullying thing was just the last piece that pushed her over the edge. It was kind of like the same thing with Tyler Clemente. So here's a young man at Rutgers University, and his roommate films him in an intimate situation with another guy. He's never told anybody that he's gay, never, talked to anybody about that. And so when that came out, he was already at the edge, and there was that final thing of that embarrassment and shame and everything that pushed him over the edge, where he committed suicide. But please understand this. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender youth are 4 times more likely, and questioning youth are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide as their straight peers. Now, I think one of the challenges for us is the church has not done a good job in knowing how to deal with somebody who's struggling with this. Like if I'm in a secular school, I can't say they're struggling with this. I have to say they're identifying with this because, then everybody gets all crazy. But understanding, but especially in a Christian environment, I mean, if somebody's feeling one of those things, I mean, it is really hard. Who do you talk to about that? How do you feel safe about that? When I've worked at numerous colleges, Christian colleges. I talk to students on a regular basis who struggle and had countless conversations about sexuality and identity issues and all the other pieces there. And so, if you know someone who identifies with this or kind of struggles, or you think might, please understand that they are 3 and 4 times more likely to be suicidal because of all the pressure. Some of my gay friends have told me about some of the stuff that's been said to them and said to them. And here's the thing: they know how I feel, and they know that I don't agree with them, whatever. But they also know I love them, and they know I support them, even though I don't agree with them. But the stuff that I hear that they've gone through is horrible. It's absolutely horrible. The sexting piece. I mean, I hear this all the time, where some girl gets suckered into singing a guy with a picture of herself. And he promises he's never going to show anybody. And all of a sudden, before you know it, that picture's everywhere. And this poor girl walks around just horrified because she's just been beat up, and so embarrassed. Take a look at this.
Hey, Sarah.
Oh my God, she's so cute.
Dude, I got to talk to her. Love the new tattoo, Sarah.
Dude, that's Sarah. Sarah in the pink shirt, that's the girl I was telling you about.
Theater 2 on your left. Hey, Sarah. What color underwear today?
Hey, Sarah. So when are you going to post something new?
Anything you post online, anyone can see. So think before you post.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you have a friend posting on your Facebook page for you or whatever. But it comes back. I know people who have posted pictures and then went, that's not a good idea, took them down, and then years later find out that somebody else had copied the pictures and is now using them for whatever. I mean, that happens all the time. All that to say is, ladies, don't get suckered into that. This is not worth taking a risk over this. I promise you. So, how do you know if you have depression? We've talked about the differences between Owen Wilson, and his depression looks like, kind of more I'm sleeping a lot, I'm disconnected, I'm sad, I don't want to do anything, my motivation is really low. Versus Jim Carrey and his depression, it looks much more like a lot of guys that I know that struggle with depression. He says, for him, his depression is he's kind of on edge, he's kind of ticked off. Everything is just irritating to him. And instead of sleeping a lot like Owen Wilson, he says he has trouble sleeping at all. And his brain is just running 1,000 miles a minute, and he's always on edge, and everything ticks him off. Okay? Here's the thing. Both are depression, but both just look different. And I'm going to suggest one of the reasons why there's so much depression that goes left untreated, a lot of people don't, and the guys specifically, they say, well, that guy's just got an anger issue. No, it very likely might be depression. And it just plays out because it looks different in different people, right? So, the question for you is, do the intensity of your emotions match the circumstances that you're in? I mean, if you're blowing up all the time and you're angry and you don't know why, might be something going on there. If you're sad, you don't know why, might be something going on there, okay? So, different types. You have major, you have mild, you have mood roller coaster kinds, you have atypical, which is sometimes you're on or off. But let me do this. So how do you get rid of it? Study 100,000 teens, another one, fill in the blanks, treated for depression, found a reduced risk of suicide in the first month. We know that treatment works. And then, here, what do you do with them? You help them realize treatment is the key. You talk about it, let them know that, look, it's not their fault, it's not something they deserve. And you want to encourage ongoing treatment. Sometimes after they go for a while, they start to feel better. And you want to, because they might just be dealing with the symptoms and not actually be getting to the problem. Okay? And then you can report stuff on Facebook now. And I will tell you this, on the bottom of your handouts are the answers to the rest of the blanks. And so those down there bottom. But let me end with this. The reality is many of you are going to come to a time where somebody's going to come to you and they're going to say, I'm going to tell you a secret, but you're going to promise me you're not going to tell anybody. And this is what I want you to tell them, quite honestly. Let me see everybody's eyeballs up here, and then I'm done. I can't keep that secret, and here's why. Because your life is more important than our friendship. Your life is more important than our friendship. I would rather have you alive and not be my friend than be dead and be my friend. And this is not a promise I want to keep. And so we don't want to keep the promise. And we're going to do everything we can do to get them connected with somebody who can get them the treatment, because we know that there's help and there's hope available, and you guys can come and be brokers of hope and be the friends that walk along with them through the entire journey. All right? Amen? All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great